Hello and welcome to Literary Prospects. I'm Kelly Vick, your host, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's guest. Marisa Silver is the author of the novels The Mysteries, Little Nothing, the New York Times bestseller Mary Coyne, Los Angeles Times Book Prize finalist The God of War, and No Direction Home. Her latest novel, At Last, is out now. Her story collections include Alone with You and Babe in Paradise, a New York Times Notable Book of the Year and a Los Angeles Times Best Book of the Year. Her fiction has appeared in The New Yorker and The Atlantic, among other periodicals, and has been anthologized widely. She's a recipient of fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the Coleman Center for Scholars and Writers, MacDowell, Yaddo, the Ucrust Foundation, and La Maison d'Ormar. She lives in Los Angeles. Marisa Silver, thank you so much for being here today to discuss your beautiful new novel, At Last. Booklist says Silver's latest is a gorgeous testament to the endurance and depth of familial bonds. Author Jennifer Egan says At Last charts a rich, fascinating landscape that's been largely ignored by contemporary fiction. Author Paul Yoon says, here's the magic of Marisa Silver's books. They capture beautifully not only entire lives, but the complex histories that pulse through our country. At Last, which is both a vast and soulfully intimate chronicle of the ties that bind family, and the power of all the decisions one makes across the years, is quite simply her best book yet. I was enthralled by its pure grace, by how truthfully it reveals to us our great longings and regrets. And author Megha Majumdar says, alive to what soars within so-called ordinary life, and told in prose which exhilaratingly pursues and seizes the truths of marriage and family. At Last is an astounding achievement. And I could have gone on. There were many more beautiful blurbs about this book, but I want to talk to you. Thank you so much for being here, Marisa.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
How would you describe this book? What can you tell us about At
Well, I
Last?
think what I'll start by saying is how the idea came to me. This might
Yeah.
be the best way to start out by describing it. When I was a little girl, I had two grandmothers, and when my parents would go away, they would leave us in their care, and we would spend, 4 days with one grandmother and 3 days with another, or whatever the split was. And one of these times, I was about 4 years old, my older sister 6. Um, the first grandmother who was keeping us put us into her car to drive us to the next ones. And she turned around in her car seat and she said, "You love me more than your other grandmother, don't you?" And I remember, yeah, I remember that. I'm much older than 4 right now. And it's a memory that I have carried with me for all these decades. I think in the same way that we tend to remember things that were emotionally very fraught, you
Yeah.
know, we remember some of the like happy-go-lucky times, but we tend to really remember things that caused us consternation or were upsetting or whatever. And I remember feeling frightened by that question. I was frightened by a lot of things at age 4. And I remember thinking, I would not have been able to articulate what my fear was about, but I just remember that feeling of being frightened. My older sister was much more self-possessed, and she had a good ready answer, which was, no, we don't. But I remember, I mean, that feeling of like fear and also that sense that something's wrong. Like that's certainly not what a grandmother or even a parent is supposed to be asking you. So as a child, I think you sometimes have an innate feeling that something's wrong, even if you
Yeah.
articulate why that's wrong. So I thought a lot about that over the years, in the back of my mind, and then and then it became sort of a more pressing question about why would she have said such a thing? And
Mm.
what does that mean? What did it mean for her to say it? I mean, certainly something much deeper than competitiveness.
Hmm.
Um, Although competitiveness obviously was there. And I began to imagine the lives of two grandmothers, not my own. I didn't know them very well. They died before I could get to know them well. But I began to imagine two women who were in a relationship that had that superficial competition. And it was and once I sort of began to figure out who these two women were, how they were in relationship to one another, what their natures were, I began to explore that question, what lay beneath the sense of competition they both felt, especially
Mm.
about surrounding the love of their only grandchild. So it really was a novel that started off with that simple question, like, why would someone say that? And then evolved into a novel about two women whose we follow their lives really from their earliest years all the way to their deaths, and exploring the nature of their ability to love, their ability to be loved, how they conceive of family, what that means to them, how they conceive of their lives, and over the course of 80 or 90 years, many things happen in the world
Mhm.
that affects them in ways big and small. And I wanted to track that as well. How are these seemingly ordinary lives, whatever that means,
Mhm.
um, in affected by the social changes around them?
How did these two characters, Evelyn and Helene, how did they come to you?
That is the hardest question. I don't know how characters come to me or anyone. They sort of, I don't know. I guess there's like a feeling that you get sometimes, or I should just speak about me.
Mhm.
Um, it can be a sense of a tone of voice, or it can be a
Mhm.
sense of an attitude of a woman, or in this case, a woman, or
Mhm.
an outfit that I see them in, or something that I suddenly begin to get this kind of sense of the texture. And then I just spend a lot of time putting them into situations which allow them, I mean, they are not independent of me, I understand that, but that give them as characters the opportunity to behave.
Mhm.
And I try to really not project a lot onto them in terms of what I think they should do. I try
Mhm.
to be really open to whatever my impulse has them do. Because I think that, what I don't want to do is create two characters and they represent something. Each one
Mhm.
represents this kind of person, that kind of person, whatever,
Mhm.
I mean, I don't think there are kinds of people, but in order for them not to become reductive and not to fall into like, oh, she's happy, she's sad, she's funny, she's not funny, it's really about being very available to the kind of unexpected way they might react in a situation or how they
Mhm.
might solve a problem. And not, again, not imposing anything predetermined um on that. And I mean, it sounds sort of, witchy, but it's I mean, I guess it's a little bit like method acting. I'm not an
Mhm.
actress and I don't actually know really what that means, but it's being so inside of them that what they do and how they behave and the choices they make um, don't feel imposed from without. It feels that it's coming from within them. And it takes
Mhm.
a long time. It takes a long time to get to know for me to get to know characters well enough that I can allow them to behave in ways that are really not what I thought. And
Yeah.
that's when I think, the book or any novel becomes surprising, is when somebody does something where you think, wow, I believe it and it makes sense to me, but it is not what I thought. Because people are so complicated,
Mhm.
so not, you can't box them. They aren't a kind of person. They are, fully individual and idiosyncratic.
What does your process look like then? Do you spend time first, sort of just on the page, getting to know the characters and then sort of crafting story, or did the situations come to you? What does
It's
the whole
the
process look?
latter. I mean, I know I don't spend any time thinking about them um, outside of whatever situation I've put them in. So I know that there are writers who might think, know what their backstory is or know
Hmm.
a lot of information about them. And I kind of come to that information as I'm writing so that in that so then it's really a situation, at the opening chapter of the novel, for instance, the two women are meeting for the first time, their children are getting married,
Hmm.
and they're in a car driving to pick up flowers. And I just figured out began to figure out who they were in that car, having to be really close to each other, close to people they don't know, close to people they have uncomfortable feelings about the other. Um,
Hmm.
and so it's just little, but yeah, I mean, I don't really spend time thinking about them outside of the situations that they're in.
And the opening scene to the book is that it sounds like that's the first
Actually, it's
thing that
not
you
the first,
wrote.
it's not the first thing I wrote. I can't remember what the first one I wrote was, but I think it came later in the book. But that moment was, um, I don't even know what I'm going to say. In that moment, I understood a lot about them because it
Mhm.
was such an uncomfortable situation for them, and their physical proximity is so deeply uncomfortable for them. The fact that they're making a wedding that probably for neither of them is the kind of wedding they imagined,
Mhm.
um, it became these wonderful kind of limitations, to be stuck in a car, to be having to do something you don't want to do,
Mhm.
gives you the opportunity as a writer to really begin to figure out who your characters are.
Do you have a favorite?
A favorite? No. No, but I loved writing about them. I found them sort of both wonderfully. I thought they were funny. They were vexing to me. They were at times really irritating in their unwillingness to let go of these hard, these ideas of themselves. I found them really kind of moving despite themselves. They do everything they can to protect themselves in very different ways. I mean, they're different women and they come from different environments and they have a different idea of what their lives are meant to look like. But and I think the moments when they became most vulnerable were really surprising to me and moving to me. So no, I don't have a favorite. I just sort of I love them each individually and I love their interplay.
The story, we just talked about that opening scene in the car, uh, kind of centers around the required intimacy that is often forced upon us in the situation of in-laws, perhaps in other ways too. Um, what is it that fascinates you about this idea of required intimacy, and maybe especially as it plays in,
I love
you know.
that phrase. I love that phrase, required intimacy. Um, well, I mean, the situation of I think people come into your lives and sometimes you choose them and sometimes you don't choose them at all, but they're in your lives. And
Mhm.
sometimes, I've been around long enough to have people in my life for really, really long time, like really, really long time. And some of them were chosen and some of them were sort of less chosen, and yet they are really important to me.
Mhm.
And so and the love that I feel for different people is different, based on, I suppose, I guess what surprises me is the love that I feel because someone has been in my life for so long. And it's not
Mhm.
necessarily the same love as a different kind of friendship, but there is something about this longevity and the fact of, this person has accompanied me through so many things.
Mhm.
And there's a kind of strange love in that, even if it's not a love that you identify readily as, I love this person so much, he makes my heart sing, or he makes my, whatever it is, um,
Mhm.
whether it's romantic or not. So I think that I was really fascinated by that idea of what happens when you're stuck with someone,
Yeah.
and how do you what are the emotions around that? Do they turn into love? Do they just turn into like, oh my God, this person was in my life for so long, I can't wait till it's over? Do they, what and I think it's all of the above. I think there's um, so I think that was something that really, and you think about, I mean, now that I've, published the book and I'm taking it around to audiences, and so many people come up to me and they'll say, "Oh my God, my grandmother's or my in-law or my, it's these are relationships that happen because your children met each other. you
Yeah.
know, you may never have chosen those people to be your friends or to share holidays with them or to share grandchildren,
Hmm.
or to be present at their funerals, and
Hmm.
there you are in this intimate relationship. So I guess that really, to me, it was not only interesting, but it provided just an enormous amount of drama to play with, emotional drama.
Yes. Yeah. The story is also about the changing roles of women and
Hmm.
women's perception of themselves. You mentioned it covers a 70-year plus time span. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It I didn't start out saying, "Oh, I'm going to tell the story of women across the 20th and the 21st century." I never would, I would have been like, kind of s- strangled by that idea. It's so huge. But what I found inevitably was that as these women moved through the years of their lives, they were affected by changes, not only large changes, I mean, World War II, obviously huge, the women's movement, all that, but also the smaller ripples of those big historical shifts and how they rippled down to them. So I wasn't ultimately trying to say, I didn't want to do and here they are at a women's march, or here they are, in an anti-Vietnam rally, or, I didn't want to have the tentpole historical moments. They're not women who are particularly involved in politics, neither of them. But what I wanted to think about was how, in ways that they may not even have been able to articulate, did their idea of themselves change as women's lives altered and shifted
Mhm.
over the course of the century. So, for instance, um, the each of them. Well, let's just talk about Helene. She has a very limited idea of what her life is meant to look like, and it's very much meant to look like what it is in relationship to her husband.
Mhm.
She's the wife of. That's very much what she wants her life to be in the beginning. That is what she chooses, and she kind of makes it happen in a very assertive way, even,
Mhm.
to the degree of lying about certain things to make sure that she is the wife of an important man, or she perceives an important man. Um, and then, there's a certain betrayals that happen, and she's left alone as a widow. And in very small and subtle ways, I think she begins to recognize the way she placed limitations on her life, and the way that her idea of what it meant to be a woman in 1930,
Mhm.
um, was no longer relevant, not only in the world, but to her.
Mhm.
So it was and I think she makes changes, not giant changes. She doesn't, again, she doesn't go start marching for women's rights, but her sense of who she is, how she can affect people in the world, what kind of work she can do, it really changes. And so I guess my goal for the book was to try to track the reverberations of the big historical moments in these lives that are, a few or many steps away from the detonations of those moments.
Yeah. Well, you've said you can't tell the story of every moment of a life. So it's about how you pick and choose the moments that tell us more beyond the story as it's being related in that particular moment. How do you choose these
Um,
moments?
I think I've talked a little bit about this before, but I kind of began to think of it as like well, it was very specific. At the time that I began to write this book, my mom was dying of dementia and related things, and I remember being with her and constantly. reaching for photo albums because I didn't know, we didn't, there wasn't a lot of conversation. And of course, you want to say, do you remember this? Do you remember that? It's, and I began to think of the book as sort of a photo album, and that,
Mhm.
you would pick out a photograph and you would say, "Oh my God, remember when we went here?" or "Remember when we went there?"
Mhm.
Um, and uh, so I just sort of thought, okay, what would the photo album of their lives be like? And what are the photos that I would pick out and say, "Oh my God, remember when we went ice skating?" That's one chapter.
Mhm.
Remember when, we went to France? That's another chapter. So I think that's how I began to perceive of it. And then I just wrote the chapters, the things that happen in the book, the ones that were exciting for me to write. And a lot, you can't write a whole life. And a lot of it isn't, worthy of writing. That
Mm.
I wanted to find the events that would both in and of themselves be dramatically exciting, but would also suggest how relationships changed, how these women's sense of themselves changed, how the characters, because this book also includes the granddaughter as she grows up, the parents,
Mm.
how their lives alter. So it was finding those moments that would sort of have that much resonance, so that a reader would almost feel like even though they hadn't read what happened in the last 7 years, they kind of could extrapolate somehow in some maybe nonverbal way.
Marissa, we were emailing about this interview,
Mhm.
and you sent me a note that said, I would love to talk about the book, but also about literature in general. I teach and have thoughts about how books are formed and how they respond in ways direct and oblique to the moment we inhabit and what it means to be an artist right now.
Oh my God.
Even your emails are beautiful. Now, when an artist like you sends me an email like that, I just say yes, please. So, what are your thoughts on how books are formed and how they respond to this moment that we are
Well,
inhabiting
I
right
think
now?
that's the real question, is how I think we're all sort of, I think artists of all different genres are thinking like, how does my, obviously to say that the world is insane right now and the things that are happening are so distressing is, you know, it, it,
Mm,
it that's a simplification. And how do we as artists, like, what is our role? And is there a role? Like, does art make a difference? I mean, I can say that I believe that art is important, bar, that does it make a difference? Is it going to feed people who are not right now getting their food stamp stuff, money?
mhm,
But is art an essential factor in a life that is allows us to sort of see beyond ourselves and have a kind of empathy that is necessary to, being in community?
mhm,
100%. Also, it's just, it's to be inside of another person's expression, whether they're a singer or a painter or a dancer, is a way of being allowed to know the world differently than you are able to know it in your limited purview. And that is a huge gift. That is just, and to me, a necessary gift. How does art, does all art have to be like relevant to the moment? Does it all have to speak to authoritarianism or, a war that's happening? Or I guess my answer, and clearly from the book I wrote, no. This is not a book that is about the now in a very political way,
mm,
but I think that it is about, I don't think that, I think any book that attempts to sort of put on the page the way people relate to each other, the way people um, find love, withdraw love, whatever it is, that is about the now too. I mean, that, we don't stop being, have it, the things that are happening in the world, the salient things that are happening right now don't preclude the fact that we are in families. We are, also trying to, in this case, be women in a world with voices, with, you know, all those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the other thing I also think a lot about is I think, you know, we tend, sometimes I think, how can we write the moment until we have enough perspective to write the moment, right? But I,
Mm.
but I feel like we can. I feel like we can absolutely write into the moment in a very felt way. Just what are we experiencing now, even without knowing how it ends up or understanding it in any kind of perspective. How, you know, there is this lived experience that is worth putting on the page. And so I'm, you know, although some people might say, oh, well, you know, can't write about COVID while we're in the middle of COVID, say. I think I've read some stuff right in the middle of COVID that was wildly powerful to me, and
Mm-hmm.
not only helped me understand the moment that I was actually living through, um, but gave me a sense of what came before
Mm-hmm.
that makes this moment different, and so it made me understand the before. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's, you know, I'm not the first person who's going to say art is essential, but it is. I don't think we should be scared of writing about anything, whether we feel like it's relevant to the moment or whether we feel like it's historical and therefore not so relevant. I mean, you know, I think that the media searches for, you know, relevance and something to connect it to something that's, you know, meaningful in the contemporary moment. But I don't think that's our obligation as artists necessarily.
Have you always been a writer?
No, I started out as a filmmaker, and I directed in my 20s about 4 feature films and a little bit of television. And and then I had this very strong feeling that I was not telling stories the way that I wanted to tell them. And
Mm.
that um, because of the nature of film, and by and large, I was making, you know, Hollywood films. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you're someone else is giving you permission to do it. They're giving you the money to do it, and therefore they have a certain degree of say in it.
Mm.
And also they have a, you know, there are certain topics that they're not going to be making movies about. They're not going to be making movies about, by and large, you know, the very intimate story of, you know, some X, Y, or Z.
Mm.
And I began to feel like, you know, this is an exciting medium, but it's not serving me in terms of the kinds of stories that I want to tell. And
Mm-hmm.
so I stopped and I went and got a master's degree in fiction and started writing. And it was, you know, for me, a really good choice because I found the medium through which I can express the things that matter to me, um, without someone telling me what to do or why not to do the X, Y, or Z. And also, you know, being able to, you know, for instance, at last, it's the story of, you know, 2 pretty ordinary women, and it's a novel that sort of seeks to find what's extraordinary about what we think of as being ordinary.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's generally not what movies are about, you know. That's I mean, more and more for sure, but you know, to be able to, you know, have a whole chapter that takes place while a woman is ironing a blouse,
Mm.
that's not going to happen on film. But it's really speaks to me. It gets me excited, and so it was a really, for me, a really good choice to change mediums, and sort of find what I wanted to say in a medium that seemed more, I don't know. And here's the other thing. I like to work alone, turns out. So very practically, you know, I mean, it's the collaborative nature of film is really exciting, and
Mm-hmm.
I prefer to be in a room by myself. So on a truly practical level, it was a better fit for me.
What was the road to publication like for you
At at first,
at first?
um, well, you know, I had a kind of fortuitous thing happen, which was that the the very first, I think I had published one story, and then I there was some many years ago, the New Yorker started this thing called the debut fiction issue, which I don't think they do anymore.
Mm.
So this was like in 2000 maybe, or 2001, and I had just gone signed up with an agent and was going out with my first collection of short stories. So this was a few years after I graduated and got my MFA.
Mhm.
And, by some crazy luck, they chose one of my stories to be in that issue. So that was so,
Wow.
yeah.
You were in
So
the New Yorker out of the gate.
I was. And so,
Wow.
that's just incredibly lucky. And then, and
Or
then
because you're incredibly good.
thank you. But it's also luck. And so, um, and then, I was able to publish my first book pretty easily on which was a collection of stories. And then, publication it's a journey, and some books do great and some books don't, and some books, find their audience right away, and some books find their audience way down the line. Um, and I think I've just become really comfortable with that. Um, I I sort of see everything as the body of work as much as each individual
Hmm.
work. And so it just it feels incredibly lucky to be able to get a book published and put between covers and supported in the world, but it also feels like it's sort of, each book is a diary of me, who I was, what I had to say, how I could say it as I proceed through my life, um, which is very personal and not about whether, you know, how the book does in the world or whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
it's writing is like a lens through which I live my life, or one of the lenses through which I live my life, I should say. And it sort of allows me to know what I think about and to
Mm.
explore what I think about, and then to try to shape some, make an artful shape of something that expresses what I'm thinking about. And
Hmm.
every time I start a new book, I think, well, what do I care about now? What matters to
Mm.
me now? What am I confused by now? What am I not knowing the answer to now that I want to explore?
What do you know now that you wish you had known before publishing that first book?
Um, the first book, I can nothing, because there was such an innocence is bliss quality to that publication. First of all, it happened way before the internet. And so, and I wasn't living in New York. I live in Los Angeles. So I was really outside the nexus of publishing. I didn't know anything. Um, and so it was all very free and
Mhm.
very I thought of nothing other than trying to make these stories as good as I could. And
Mm.
and there was, and I wish I want to get back to that place. Every time I start something, I try to mentally get back to that place of not thinking, it doesn't do me any good to think about the business or what is and isn't selling, or all those sorts of things that one can become preoccupied with, especially when a book comes out. So I think that I try to return to a place of just not knowing, not, just being a writer and putting words on paper and trying to make satisfying stories or novels. So maybe it's not what I would have told myself then, but maybe what I continue to tell myself now is get back to that place.
You work in the medium of short fiction as well as novel.
Mhm.
Is there one that you feel closer to or more partial to, or is it
Um,
both?
that is such a good question. I don't know. It's funny when ideas come to me, they come to me either as a novel idea or as a short story idea.
Hmm.
It's not that I think, oh, there's an idea. It could be either, and I have to, it's like it's
Hmm.
very clear to me, like, oh, this is something that exists in this very compressed space of 20 pages. It it doesn't have it, I need it to have resonance, but it doesn't have all these tentacles that I want to follow.
Hmm.
Another idea will come to me and I'll say, oh, there's so many roads that spoke off of this central idea.
Hmm.
I want to be able to have a big territory, big sort of canvas that I can explore all those things. So, no, I mean, and the the feeling after finishing a novel is one of this incredible journey. The first
Hmm.
feeling after finishing a short story is that I've sort of done an acrobatic event and I stuck the landing. Like
Mhm.
it's stories require such compression. You have like 4 or 5 moves, and they have to explode a world. They have to a world explodes from those 4 or 5 moves. So it's very precise and it's kind of a magic trick almost.
Mm.
You can create something that a whole world emerges out of 20 pages. That's kind of like a magic trick. Um, and a novel just feels like a really lived in piece of clothing. Like I've worn this clothing for years in very different places and events in my life. I can track my life through the course of writing a novel as well because it takes 3, 4 years. So I don't think there's a preferable form, but they have very different physical feelings to me. Like I feel it in my body,
Mm.
what the experience is.
Do you have a particular writing routine?
I should. No. When I'm writing the first draft of something, I give myself a number of words to achieve each day, and I don't and it's a number that's for me something I think I can do. I don't want to fail every day,
Mhm.
and I write, but I don't write perf to perfection. I just get the words out on the paper. I get my subconscious working. I get, and I don't then second guess it. I don't, I the next day I move on. And it's sort of like I just keep compiling pages. And finally, I'll have a draft and then I'll look at the draft and then I start to really play. And then it's just about taking these wild swings with, voice or tense or, ways of shaking up what it is that I did. I'm sort of in the second draft, I'm sort of trying to figure out what it is I'm writing. I've written
Mm.
it down in a very intuitive way. I mean,
Mhm.
there's a lot of analytical decision making that goes on, but a lot of it is just really allowing my intuition and my subconscious to rule the day. And then I look at it and I say, okay, well, what did I write?
Mhm.
What is the heart of that? What is it, and the second draft is, and subsequent drafts is sort of figuring out where that is, where the center of it is. So in the beginning, it's just you got to put the words on the page for me. It's just about not being, you know, don't there's no muse gonna alight and I'm gonna write 50 pages. Like today I'm writing 1,000 pages. Tomorrow I'm gonna write 1,000 words, another,
Mhm.
be like a pedestrian thing. But and then trying just hard to excuse me, keep myself from having answers, which I know is sort of a funny, paradoxical thing to say, but I feel like when I know where something is going, then it's dead for me.
Mm.
Or dead is in terms of it's not alive for me anymore because I'm sort of steering the ship towards this destination and I'm not allowing myself to get waylaid. So I try really hard to not impose endings or um, you know where I think characters should end up or but just to be really open to where things go so that I can be surprised and then hopefully the reader is surprised.
We mentioned that you teach.
Hmm.
Um, what's your best advice for aspiring authors and students?
um well, there's a lot of different things that I would want to say, one of which is to be comfortable with not knowing and
Mm.
really comfortable. It's an anxious making situation where you're working on something and you don't know if it's going to work or you don't even really know what it is.
Mm.
I guess it's my belief just from my own experience that as I was just saying that you only find it through the doing and that to suppose that you would know at the very beginning and then you would simply write a lot of pages until you got there, to me that's not, for me personally, that is not what is exciting. The exciting part of the process is um, being really comfortable with being lost.
Mm.
I guess that's one thing that I would say to people is just be really really okay with not knowing, with being lost, with not knowing what it is you're doing for a really, really long time. And people ask you, what are you working on? What are you doing? What's it about? Be comfortable saying, I'm not sure yet, you know? And people give you that look like, I'm not anything. But yeah, I guess that's my biggest piece of advice is just be really comfortable with uncertainty and with um and it's hard to trust, it's hard to trust that you're going to get there, especially if you haven't written a lot and you don't have the proof isn't in the pudding.
Mm,
But I think that it's vital to be just um okay with being in a state of not knowing.
that's great. I love it. We have a traditional last question on
Uh-oh.
this podcast.
I think I didn't prepare for this. Are you going to ask me?
It is when at last is made into a movie or series,
Oh my God.
what do you think the theme song could be?
Oh my God. Oh, well, I mean, it has to be it has to be the Etta James singing at last, but that would be the obvious choice. It would be Stop Making Sense by Talking Heads.
I love it. I love it. Marisa Silver, thank you so, so much for joining today. It has truly been a pleasure getting to
Thank
talk
you.
to you.
It's wonderful to talk to you, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.